thank you, Bill. That was a really good analysis of that. And I feel like maybe culturally in the world, if they feel they are losing some privilege, just the way things are going, where they can regain it and find it is perhaps in a high demand, high control religion. I think that's part of it. And that kind of is one of my conclusions here in the story that I'm going to be covering, which it was an article in the Tribune. The LDS Church retention rates are down in the US, but male membership is up. Males are finding a reason to stay more than females in the church. So
are you saying that men are joining the church in numbers greater than the women who are leaving it in order to account for this strange headline?
No, I think that men are staying and women are leaving for the first time ever. But I will say that when women leave, eventually everybody leaves.
But male membership is up.
Not necessarily up. It is now higher. We'll go into the stats than female, but that is because more females are leaving, if that makes sense. So again, it's dicey. You just have to rely on surveys. This is the Pew Research survey. And again, Bill, I'm so sorry that I can't switch my slides. I have no idea why it works pre-show and doesn't after show. So I have some pictures here from all the things in the media going on with women and Mormonism. There's so much. There's Heretic. There's, Jody and Lori and the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives and all kinds of different things. And they bring up the point in this article, and I'll just kind of paraphrase, that this is how people see Mormons. These notable shows that they're tuning into, that are getting all this, that are very popular. And this isn't really what Mormons are about. So the Pew Research Center's Religious Landscape Study gives us more answers about the true makeup of Mormonism and those that consider themselves Mormons. So this study was based on 37,000 Americans, and they surveyed 6 Christian groups, kind of their focus, Christian faith groups, in addition to Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, and Islam. And it also included atheists, agnostics, and those who identified as nothing in particular. There were 565 self-identified members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the survey. So that's kind of where all this data comes from. And,
nothing in particular, the NIPS.
The NIPS. I love that. A NIP. That's awesome. So it says when it comes, and maybe you guys can help me with this math. When it comes to the overall share of the nation's population, Latter-day Saints have been holding steady at 2%. 2% of the U.S. population, according to Pew here, from the Pew, are LDS, which is interesting to me. And they're saying when that's put into the context of overall decline of Christianity from 78% to 62%. That's a pretty big drop since the last survey in 2008, I think it was. This number, seems to represent a larger part. So it says this number does not reflect the number on the church rolls. Of course not, because we don't know what's on the church rolls. It's only an estimate of those who self-identified to surveyors of the Latter-day Saints. So I tried to do this. So people in the U.S. round up to 340 million. 2% of that is 6,800,000. Do you think that's accurate for the number of LDS people that there are in the United States?
Not going to church. There aren't that many people going to church in the world who are Mormons.
No, not at all. So anyway, I thought that was interesting, but still the survey says 2% of the United States population are LDS. Okay.
I think what this shows us that the LDS church is managing to hold on to that steady 2% by fudging the numbers shamelessly.
Yeah. Well, if they would just put out the real numbers, we would know, wouldn't we? Okay, so there were a couple different categories, and we'll kind of go into those, and then I'll ask your take on each category. So the first one was just the demographics of the LDS church. So if you go to the next slide, this I thought was really interesting. They just kind of slipped it in, but to me, it said a lot. Of those raised in the church, a bit more than half, 54%, still identify with the faith as adults. And then in parentheses, this is down from 70% in the Pew Research of 2008. I mean, think about that. 70%, a decade and a half ago, stayed with their religion. Now only 54%. And that's across the board. 52% of members are male. This is up from 44%. Again, comparing to this 2008 survey. 47% are female. This is down from 56%. If you can go ahead, one slide, we can see a graphic on that, and then we'll come back to the rest of the stats. Yep, here we go. So I think that's important to talk about just for a second. R. Femin and Bill, what are your thoughts? I mean, this seems to track kind of with what you just covered, Bill.
It seems to be a substantial percentage.
It does.
You pointed out earlier that if women aren't in the church, then the babies being produced aren't LDS, right?
Exactly.
And you can have a Mormon man marry a non-Mormon woman for sure. You can have a Mormon woman marry a non-Mormon man for sure. But I have a hunch that a Mormon man married to a non-Mormon woman leads more often to the children being raised outside of the faith than in. And I think this is bad news for the church if this trend continues to any degree.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I think we hear this anecdotally, and I hope it's not happening, but you hear people who are in mixed faith marriages kind of being encouraged maybe to, let's just cut that one loose and let's get a faithful, whichever partner, so they can be raised in the faith. And I know I read a book, what was it called? The God Virus. If you guys haven't read that, by Dr. Del Rey, that's pretty incredible. They looked at a religion as a virus, and there are ways to promote the virus, right? To transfer it. The most effective way is when someone is born into a religion, and raised by two parents who are also on board with the religion or the virus. And that is how you transmit it. And a person like that, even if they may step away from their faith at one point, they often will return if they are raised in that way. So having both parents on board with that particular religion, extremely important. So I agree with you, Bill. Let's go back one.
I wanted to say that.
Oh, go ahead, Arthur.
Can we see that slide again? Because I want to say, on behalf of all the men in the church, I think we should be congratulated on finally being more spiritual than the women. That's what this shows to me.
Yeah.
I disagree with your interpretation. I think
It's
shows
right there. These are your facts.
No, I think it shows that it works better for a male in the church. It's easier to stay in. It works for you, right?
Did it work worse for males in 2007?
No, I think what it did is it worked more for, I don't know. That's a good question. I think maybe people weren't thinking about this in these terms, but you're right. There are more men in the church now, according to this graph, but the women are dropping. And look how they were fairly steady and then kind of plummeted right there. So, and that tracks with some other things we've covered too. Just in Christianity in general, women are stepping away, just mostly social issues, honestly, is what the trends are saying. So.
Something else too, there is a contradiction here. Remember the audio from that regional conference where the women was, 600 and something, and the men were 600 and something, and the women were 1,800. It was 3 times.
Yeah.
Right.
And I've heard anecdotal data in other places that the women who are single looking for someone, there are a lot more of them than the men who are active and single. So I have to at least ask if more less active, inactive, don't want anything to do with actually going to church men still self-identify themselves as Mormon, whereas maybe more women who step away also step away from even labeling themselves as having been part of the faith, because this data point and the data point from that conference, which is anecdotal and isolated, but also goes along with other things that I've heard in the past in terms of when people have reported numbers to me, those 2 data points contradict each other, and I think at least raises some questions.
I do too. And what I wonder is, could it be age related? Could the women stepping away be the ones that, are a little older, and the young women are still in the church because they're serving a mission and they want to get married, and they'll step away in about 10 years when reality hits? I don't know. It's a really good point, because you're right. There are all kinds of jokes about, 3 women for every man. So interesting. Hopefully we'll learn more at some point, and we would know for sure if the church would put their stats out. Okay. 72% white, and we can go to the next graph after this, because we do have a graph on this while I'm reading those. So next slide, and then the next slide. There we go. That's down from 85%, 6% Black, up from 2%, 12% Hispanic, up from 7%, 1% Asian, no change, and 7 multi-ethnic, up from 3%. And it says, despite these shifts, the church still ranks among the least diverse. Any comments on that? And then we'll go through the rest quickly.
Well, the Asians are holding steady at 1%. I'm guessing the increase in Blacks has to do with the opening up of Africa.
Yeah.
And what else do we have? Hispanic going up. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we crossed the threshold a number of years back where the church announced that the majority of members of the church were Spanish speaking.
Yeah. And now they're French speaking, I believe. Isn't that interesting? I heard that anecdotally from someone in the mission department, that the number 1 language in the church is French. And of course, we know why that is.
I can't believe that.
Africa.
I want Martine to get on that, because she has a vested interest.
I have told Martine to start her own podcast because, this is true. I wish she would, Martine.
Oh, so they're speaking French in some of these African countries. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. Yep, that's
okay.
it. That's exactly right.
We should then expect that 6% of prophet, seers, and revelators going forward would be African American, correct? And 12% would be Hispanic.
Yep.
And 7% would be something other than white. And I'll just note, in a church led by older white men, to see that percentage going down and down might be a little scary to them.
Yeah, I think it would. However, without the racial component, the numbers are going up and up by their proselyting in Africa. Although all of Christianity is proselyting there. And I have read stats where the LDS church is not doing as well as some of the other Christian churches there, but they still are gaining massive amounts of members where they may not be in other places. Okay, let's go back to that rest of the two back.
This data is just US, correct?
Yeah. What was that?
This data is just United States.
Yes, this is just United States from the Pew Research. That's right. They talked about money. 29% report a household income of $100,000 and up, and that's higher by 16% than it was before, while 27 cite between 50 and 99,000. And that's down from 38. So Mormons are becoming more affluent. And again, you could spin it the other way and say being affluent and a male in the church works. That's how it works,
Or Yogi Berra is right, and a nickel's not worth a dime anymore.
Exactly. Yep. I wonder if that took into account inflation.
Yeah, you know what? That's an interesting idea. The last one under demographics I have here are 37% have children under 18 living at home. That's down from 49%. So that either shows less children or an aging demographic. And there's no way to tell exactly. Yeah. Despite this decline, Latter-day Saints are surpassed only by Hindus, 44%, and Muslims, 42% in the last survey. So that's kind of interesting.
So everybody's got these adult kids living at home around the world?
Well, I'm going to raise my hand. It happens. All right. Stance on social issues.
It's just interesting to see it in other religions and other parts of the world. Apparently, it's not just here in the U.S.
No, I think economically, generational living is coming back, honestly, where everybody, and maybe that's not a bad thing. I don't know. Okay, let's go to the next slide here. These are social issues and how the LDS church weighs in here. 69% LDS, did I put this? Okay, sorry, I think I put that last. Okay, 41%, they are more likely to say it's best for children if the mother does not participate in paid labor in favor of staying home. Can you believe it's 41%? That was really surprising to me. 41% say better that the mom stay home. Says a likely contributing factor to this is the faith's official blueprint for gender and gender roles, like what Bill talked about, known as the Family of Proclamation to the World. 69% say they favor a diverse, immigrant-friendly society, a similar number to many other Christian groups studied. 74 view science and religion as compatible, nearly 10% points ahead of Muslims, who are at 66% are the next most likely to take this view. And I've always thought the LDS church, if you look at it in the right way, is compatible with science, right? We have planets, aliens, all of that. I was raised by 2 scientists, never had a problem with that.
You know why Mormons say that?
Why?
Because they don't know shit about science.
That's exactly. I was just about to say that. You stole my line. Yeah, I was raised by scientists, and it was a lot of junk science when it came to the church. Absolutely. So they think it's compatible. Have you ever visited the Bean Museum at BYU? Go do that. I told Nemo to do that while he was here. I don't know if he did. 36% say climate change is the result of natural causes, and the most of any group by 6 percentage points. So, and again, I think that has to do with the end of the world. Jesus will come. Jesus will heal the earth. Jesus will fix everything. And then the last one at 69% Latter-day Saints are more likely to say abortion should be illegal in all or most cases. This is down slightly from 70%. They are at 55%, the second most likely to say that an increase in acceptance of transgender individuals is bad. So, and I think this will play into a story that Bill's going to cover later on. So any comments on all those stats on social issues? None of them really surprised me, but it's interesting to see where the numbers are compared to other religions.
I already made my comments, Bill.
No, I don't have anything else to add. I'm looking at the numbers, and I'm sort of surprised by the science and religion, but I think that's sort of a self-deception that anybody in a religion that needs to believe crazy things would sort of say.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you couldn't believe your religion. It's the only way you can justify belief. But otherwise, no, I don't have anything to.
Just look at the Light and Truth letter, look at Psych Word Radio, look at the Jacob Hansen show, all that stuff where they are foisting pseudoscience on their listeners, whether it's knowing or not. I think in most cases it's not knowing, except when Colby and I review it and we expose it and we correct it and they keep doing it, then it starts to look kind of intentional.
Yeah, no, and junk science of the day, right? My parents were huge Scalzonites. My dad, although he was a PhD metallurgist, believed that chunks of other planets is how we explain dinosaurs. And that's what I was taught. So to him, science was compatible, but that is junk science. So I think that kind of explains it.
I used to believe it too. And then I started thinking, so if all these pieces are floating around there in space, was this Earth put together from other worlds like a jigsaw puzzle, such that the entirety of huge dinosaur skeletons were left intact?
I think that's what they're saying, but that's absolutely impossible because the Earth was molten.
Well, it's a massive game of Tetris. God has to do something to keep himself entertained.
Okay, let's move on to the next. This is lifestyle trends, and we'll go through these quickly. So I thought this was kind of interesting. 87% are married to someone who shares their faith. Okay, this is what we were talking about before. The largest of any group, and that is up from 82% in the 2015 report. Now, does that indicate that people that don't share faith are divorcing? I mean, we're in a silo, of course, but we see that all the time in mixed faith marriage. So I don't know. It seems
remarkably high, doesn't it? If you're saying that 87% of the Mormon respondents in this said that they're married to Mormons.
That's right. Someone who shares their same faith. I was really surprised too. And that's why I thought, is it because people are cutting ties when the faith is no longer in common for reasons that we just barely discussed? So
I also think, Rebecca, that we live in an age of information. So when somebody has a faith crisis and deconstructs, I think their partner is more likely to leave with them. I think if you go back 30 years, 40 years ago, your spouse losing their faith and making claims about the church's contradictions in its history or doctrine would be so much more difficult for a non-interested partner to even begin to get clued into that. I think now there'd be a higher chance of being on the same page, which may also support sort of the higher number.
That's a great analysis, meaning that then they would leave together and the ones remaining would be of the same faith. And, I think that's really true because think about it. Back in the day, if you lost your faith and you were trying to get your spouse on board, you might hand him a weird mimeographed paper from the Tanners or something. Now you can pretty much say, look, watch this podcast. It's even faithful, but it brings up these issues, and we see that all the time on social media where one spouse will say, can anyone recommend something that my spouse could watch that would be sort of a soft landing, but at least introduce some of the topics? I don't think anyone ever says the newscast. Maybe they do. I don't know. But no, I love that, Bill. I think that's really interesting. This is good. 72% say they have volunteered in the past year, the highest of any group by 20 percentage points. Now, why do you guys think that is?
That's
why
all
do you
we
think
do.
they think they're volunteering?
We're always volunteering. We're always being called upon to volunteer.
Right. But it's not in the community.
Or pretty much everything we do in our church callings, although I don't know if the people would think of that when they're answering it.
Well, and I believe, and it even says in the article here, that perhaps they think what they're doing in their church, fulfilling their callings, even going to the temple, is volunteering. Where you ask that of another religion, and they would probably think, yes, I was at a soup kitchen. Yes, I drive a Meals on Wheels. But we think, yes, I taught my nursery class. Yes, I went to the temple 3 times. So I don't know. I kind of chalk it up to that. But not that Mormons don't have wonderful humanitarian grassroots efforts, because they do. But I thought that was any thoughts on that, Bill?
Just that it rarely, all my time in the church, there were maybe a handful of members who did any sort of significant community service.
Yeah.
And all of us thought that helping the Jones family move and dropping a casserole off at Sister Smith's house and serving in the church was all volunteer work.
Yeah. And the temple. That's the one I have such an issue with because you are really, well, I won't go into it here, but yeah, to me, that's not volunteering.
Well, we don't serve in the temple anymore. Now we worship in the temple.
That's right. We worship in the temple. But anyway, attending the temple, simply walking through the doors. I think a lot of people think they are doing things for other people who have passed on, and they consider that volunteering.
And serve and worship are both euphemisms for sleep.
Yeah, you guys can't say temple anymore. It's house
Oh,
of the
I'm
Lord.
so, I will never catch up. I still say
We
Mormon.
don't serve in the temple. We worship in the house of the Lord.
Oh my, so I can't say Mormons go to the temple. I have to say members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints worship in the house of the Lord. That is too much.
I know, it's like the
can't do
name
it.
of the church, right?
I'm too lazy.
The trick and the goal is to put as many conjunctions into the damn name as you possibly can.
I think that's true. Although, have you noticed that they are shortening it everywhere that they use it to simply the Church of Jesus Christ? And that may work here in Utah, but out in the world, there are, I would say, 1,000 churches of Jesus Christ. So that's
That
probably a flag.
that is a deception. It's also a violation of the commandment of God.
It is, but they're doing it. They're doing
Because
it on
it's
their
not the whole
website.
name.
It's not the whole name.
that God gave back in 1838. And we got a section, a really short one in the Doctrine and Covenants saying it.
Yeah.
This is the name that you shall call it. And when you say Church of the Latter-day Saints, it is just as much a violation of that commandment as the Church of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Well, go on any of their assets on Instagram or Facebook, and you will see the Church of Jesus Christ. So, which is hard to say. You kind of have to say it like this. Anyway, all right, let's move on to, I think, our very last one. I thought these were really interesting. LDS politics. Okay, this was kind of fascinating. It says Latter-day Saints may harbor some hesitations around the current administration, but they remain overwhelmingly Republican and committed to small government, while many embracing ideas of Christian nationalism, or the belief that Christian beliefs should dictate American civil life because the founding fathers were Christian. Yeah. DS. 73% as Republicans or leaning toward the GOP, the most of any religious group studied, and that is up from 65%.
Really? That's surprising.
Yeah. That is surprising. Compared to just 10% who label themselves liberal, no change. Nearly a quarter, 23, identify as Democrat or leaning that way, up from 22.
So, Rebecca, are you going to posit here that more liberal Mormons are leaving the church than conservative Mormons to account for this?
You could spin it that way. What do you think, Bill? That's kind of how your spin that now you've got us all thinking about.
That would be my hunch. My hunch would be that liberal members of the church are much more likely to leave.
Yep. And that could explain women too. Like I said, social issues, more liberal point of view are making more women leave, as we talked about in another study about a month ago. So they are 63% the most supportive of small government, and that's up again from 56%. So everything is going up, which again, Bill, your theory makes a lot of sense. 65% say they support the United States declaring itself a Christian nation. And this is a question that they hadn't asked before, so there is no data. We'll have to wait till next time. But 65% of the Latter-day Saints surveyed said, yes, we can make that declaration. We're a Christian nation. And it says, by comparison, a separate 2023 study found that 38% of Latter-day Saints qualified as Christian nationalists. That's kind of interesting, because what is it now? Yeah. While nearly 30 percentage points less than the Pew findings, a discrepancy perhaps due in least part to the 2023 report's more detailed approach to the subject, this number was significantly ahead of the 29% that the report pegged as the, turning my page, U.S. average. So I thought all those stats were really interesting. I think that we probably covered it pretty well. I don't know if anybody in the chat was surprised by anything there, but I love your idea, Bill, that maybe people with the different point of view are just jumping ship. Any final thoughts on all those stats?
No, my mind fairly reels. It's difficult interpreting them. They don't always mean what they seem to mean at face value.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
and some things go up in ways that I surprised by, and some things went down in ways that I expected. And I think sometimes real trends, what's really happening isn't able to be really sorted out until you get maybe multiple surveys down the road.
Yeah, I think so too. And even this Pew research that you covered last week, it seemed like every different news source covered it differently. Christianity holds steady, Christianity in decline. You look at it different ways. You can crunch the numbers to support your narrative however you want. It's hard to be impartial. We are all in a silo, and we recognize it.